Good. Sorry about that. So we'll get started now. So this talk is about pushing data to and from the cloud with Azure Data Sync. So we're going to be looking at primarily how to push data from an on-premise database up to SQL, Windows Azure SQL database. It used to be called SQL Azure, and so I'm used to calling it that, so I may slip back into that. But it's the database in the cloud. So my name is Chris Woodruff. I'll quickly go through this. You can download the slide deck later. I am a Microsoft MVP in Visual C#. I work at Telerik as a trainer. And then you have some contact information up there. And I do a podcast called Deep Fried Bites. And I have some stickers up here if anyone wants some afterwards. And so we will get right into it. So the first thing I want to do is how many people in here have used Windows Azure? So good deal. How many people have used Windows Azure SQL databases? So a couple. Okay. So the goal for this talk overall is to get you guys to kind of dunk your toe in the Azure pool. What I'm going to be showing you today is very simple, but there's a lot of things that we can do with Azure. So primarily what I'm going to show you is, we can now back up our databases in the cloud very easily, so we don't have to do tape backup as much. You can still do tape backup, but think of this as just another way of storing your database and keeping it safe. So we're going to go through an overview of what SQL Data Sync is, or Azure Data Sync. We're going to understand the benefits from it. We're going to show a demo going through the Azure portal. Then for all the developers in here, all the .NET developers, we're going to show, if you don't want to go through the portal, how you can use .NET code and write your own syncing program to do the same thing that we're going to do through the portal. And then finally, we're going to talk about the scenarios around the uses and places that you can extend this out to and use it for syncing other types of data. So you can see that I flashed up the definition of the Microsoft Sync framework. I didn't want to have to read off that. So you guys can actually take a look at that and on the slide deck, or just look it up at the end. I've got some resource links. But primarily, everything that we're going to be doing today is using the Microsoft Sync framework. So the Azure Data Sync team is using that in the cloud. And so we're going to use that through the portal. And then we're going to use it locally when we write our C# code to do that syncing. So has anyone used the Microsoft Sync framework before? Okay, so we're going to try something new today. So in this new idea about data in the cloud, there's a lot of things that we have to sync up. I mean, we all have data. We get data to and from a lot of different devices. You guys all got your Surfaces, I hope. You guys didn't have to wait in line for 6 hours the last couple days. So you can get data on those. You can get data to servers that you guys have back in your enterprises. You can get data on laptops. So what I'm going to be showing you is primarily a way to do on-premise databases. I'm going to scenario around servers and then a database in the cloud. But there's nothing to say that you can't use this to sync up with sales people in your organization, to have local databases on their machines that sync back up to the cloud and then sync back down to a server. So there's lots of different ways that we can use this technology. So a benefit of using Azure Data Sync is we're going to have complexity without code. And we're going to have not a lot of complexity, but there is some. And some of it through the portal is abstracted away so you guys don't have to do very much work. If you do, we can drop down to that, like I said, that C# code and become very specialized. The other is, we can leverage the Azure platform. I'm a consultant and also a trainer. So primarily in my career, I always try to find ways for my customers, my clients, to have things, one, cheaper, and have things that perform very well and that have the least amount of maintainability. So we're trying to leverage the Azure platform because, one, it's affordable, it scales, and I hope you guys have been to other Azure talks that talk about the benefits of the entire platform. I'm not going to go in through that, but I'm going to show you one way that we can leverage the Azure platform to help ourselves with data. So let's get right into this and show a demo. So what I've got here is I have the Azure, and I'm going to increase the size of this so everyone can see this. Is that good? Can everyone see that in the back and corners and everything? Okay, so what we have is we have some databases, and I've got a few databases up in the cloud. The one that we're going to be working with today is Chinook. Chinook is a database that anyone can grab off of Coplex. It's a demo database that involves a hypothetical music store. So it has things like the music, the artists, the albums, tracks, and it also has a business side with employees and customers, invoices, and so forth. So I like to use it a little better than Northwind or VentureWorks because it actually has some interesting data for me because I like music. So we'll be looking at that and inserting artists, music artists, and stuff like that. So this database I have in here, so I'll show you what it looks like through Management Studio. So I do have, and we can go right out to our Azure instances, our databases through SQL Management Studio. So the same way that you deal with databases today and work with them through Management Studio, you can do the same thing with SQL Azure. So because of the time constraints and how long it takes to provision some of these technologies and some of these instances we're going to be showing, I'm not going to show everything. I'm not going to go end to end. I'm going to show you how to do stuff, but I've already set this up in last night, so it wouldn't take the 15 to 20 minutes to get everything provisioned. What we're going to do is you'll see that out here we have this sync preview. Now SQL or Azure Data Sync is still in beta. It hopefully will come out of preview at some point in the near future, but it's very stable and works very well. If we go out and select that, you'll see that we have an agent, and I'll move this over. We have an agent and a sync data sync group. Now those work in conjunction and in the cloud, but we need to install something on our servers. So if I go back and I open up this, we have a what we call the data sync agent. And the data sync agent will get installed on your server. It runs as a Windows service. What basically its job is, it's an intermediary between your on-premise database and the sync framework, the sync server up in Azure. So we come in, we will set this up, and let me run this again. Let me make sure I have internet because okay. So I'm going to go on, and we're going to just kind of take a look at this. But just know that you will install this sync agent. You will set it up. You will connect it to your databases that you need to. And then what that will do is it will reach out. If you could see in here, it says submit agent key. You will get the agent key, and we'll show you how to do that in a second. You will get the agent key from your Azure portal. You will add it in here. At that point, the two sides will be connected. They'll find each other, and they'll be able to have a connection. So I brought my laptop in from the speaker room, and something must have disconnected while I was off the network. So if we go back to the sync agent that's on the Azure side, I'll show you how you create that. Basically, you'll say sync, new sync agent. You'll give a name for it, and I'll just call it test. You will give a region that you want it to exist in. That's basically picking the data center around the globe that you want that sync agent to be. Now, I would recommend that you pick a location that's very close to the SQL Azure databases that you're going to be working with. So I wouldn't install your databases and have your databases in North US and have the sync agent in Europe. Might not be the best performance. So everything for me is set up in North Central US, and then you just say OK. So what you'll get is you'll get this ability, and then basically it's not very complex. You'll see property, you'll see some data around it. You'll see the last time it was synced with the local sync agent. There isn't a lot to it. A lot of the magic comes from the data sync group itself. So the data sync group is the technology that says, I want to sync up this database, and I'm going to go through this sync agent. So I will show you how that is set up. Again, we have to give it a name. We have to give it a region. And the key is, no matter what you do, you have to install this in the same region as your agent, or you won't be able to see it. So these data sync groups cannot see past their own data center. So if I come in here and say test, and I leave it North Central US, you'll come up to this hub, the sync hub. Now the sync hub, all it really means is the database that will be synced up with your on-premise database in the cloud. So I'm going to choose a database. I'll say Chinook, which is, I have a database called Chinook that's installed up in SQL Azure. You have to give it the username. So when you install and get a new instance of Azure, you have to give it a username and a password so that you can authenticate for certain services. So if I say C. Woodruff, and I give it the password, it'll wait. You'll see that we have a little indicator, and now we have a green box. It just verifies the username password. Down here, we have this conflict resolution. And what the conflict resolution means is, if there's a conflict, who's going to win? So we have that a lot in our databases today. Yes, sir? Yeah, so the question is there a way through code to do conflict resolution on a table level? So yes, there is. You can't really do it in here, but you can do it through code. So most of the time I just say hub wins because I want my hub to store the data, and if there's a conflict, I want it to have the be the winner if I'm going to sync it up with other databases outside of my on-premise. So I'm going to say next. It will come up through the next step of the wizard, and it will add the reference database. So the reference database is your on-premise database. Now, it doesn't have to be. You can sync up 2 SQL Azure databases. There's nothing to say that you can't do that. You can sync up any 2 databases that you want. But for this, I'm going to come down, and you'll see that we have all of our SQL Azure databases that are on my server in the cloud, and also we have the database that we can get to through the sync agent. And that's the one that we pick. And again, for this, we don't have to give a username and password because the agent's already been authenticated, it's already been set up. So there's nothing to do around that. I'm not going to say okay because I've already done this. I'm just going to go out of this. I just wanted to walk through the wizard for you guys. If there's any questions, please ask. I like to make sure that everyone's kind of keeps up to speed with me and with everyone else. So at this point, we have a data sync group. We can come in and we can see that the status is good on both. But when you first start this up and create this, you'll get a status of not ready. So not ready just means it hasn't been configured to do everything and to get the synchronization started. So how we do that is we come into the configure, and you'll see that we can turn this automatic sync on and off, and we can also set up a sync frequency. So we can sync in minutes, hours, days, and months. So if I said minutes, the lowest frequency at this point we can do is 5 minutes. So for a lot of people, that is a constraint that they can accept. So this is one kind of endpoint that we would go beyond using the portal, and we would look at doing more of a inline code .NET to do our syncing, because there is no frequency limit to our C# code that in using the sync framework. And then we'll just come down here and we will see that we have our credentials that we set up in our wizard, and we can move on to our sync rules. So our sync rules really just mean what part of the schema are we going to set up to use with this synchronization. Now we can do whatever we want. We can come in here and easily say select all columns and all tables, or we can come in and just pick a table and pick what we want. So there is some flexibility in this to say what we want to sync up. So I did everything because I want everything to be synced up. We could just say, you know what, all I really want, because this database is going to feed a web app that will be public facing, so I just want to do albums and artists and genres and list track and track. And that's fine. You can do it any way that you want. So we set that up, we save it, and at this point it's going to take about, depending on the size of your database, it's going to take some time to get this provisioned. So this is the part where I wanted to get this all set up so that you wouldn't have to sit here and wait for the entire thing to be provisioned. We can also come in here and we can see properties. Properties are only read-only properties, kind of like taking a look at the sync agent. It just tells us the last time it was synced, the location, your subscription that you installed this sync agent on, and so forth. I'm going to actually raise up this so I can see a little bit more of the screen. There we go. And then we can come in here and see logs. So the logs will occur whenever a sync happens, or if you go in and change the sync rules. If anything changes with this sync group, the log file will track it, and it will give you the information. Over here, the message, it's kind of nice. If you click on this little file icon, basically it will copy the message to the clipboard on your local machine, and then you can take a look at it. If there was an error or some type of message that you wanted to read, you could bring it up in a text editor. So anyone have any questions at this point around here? Sir? Yeah, that's a great question. You know what? You got me. You know what? I'll figure that out, and I'll let you know right after this. You come up, and we'll look at it. I don't want to kind of go off and doing searches, so, but I'll take a look. But it probably is 443. It is an encrypted connection. Go ahead. Yeah, so it does a transaction, and if it hits any errors, one, if it has a conflict, it goes by what you've set up as who wins that conflict. So if it's hub and that transaction initiated and that data was coming down, so this is a two-way binding also. So we can have one-way binding or two-way sync. So I set up bi-directional. So as the data is coming back and forth, depending on which way it's going, it resolves it in a certain way based on the conflict criteria that you set up. Now, if it hits some major error where maybe it got disconnected or something was a major issue, it will roll back based on that transaction. And it will give you an error, and things will be just like they originally were before the sync. Okay, so let us see if somehow we got this, and I'm going to see if I can fix this really quick. So as I'm waiting, how anyone get their Surfaces this morning? Yeah, how long was the line? Okay, that's awesome. I'm looking at getting mine this afternoon. So if we take a look at services, this service will exist down in the as a Microsoft sync, and I don't know why it says it's running. So let's stop it and restart it and see what we have, because I want to show you guys what this looks like running correctly. Okay, there we go. So you can see our sync agent has the ability we can register more databases, we can unregister. This is where you would give the agent key that we set up. Let's take a look, and I didn't actually show that. So over here in our sync agent, down below it says manage key. Basically, I've already set up, so there's already been a key registered, but this is where you would get your key to manage your access. So you would say generate. You could copy it, and then you would fill this in. That key that was generated, you would fill in to this pop-up dialog, and you would say OK. If you ever want to check to see if your service can connect up to the Azure Sync server, all you have to do is say ping sync service, and it will let you know if it can get connected. So it'll say successfully pinged SQL data sync. And really, that's it. There's nothing you have to do on this side. Like I said, it's just a Windows service. So at this point, let us go through Management Studio, and I want to go out and add. Yeah, the other thing is you'll see that we have a lot of data sync tables. So when this gets provisioned on both sides, you will get some additional tables on both sides that get created to facilitate the data sync. So if we come in here and we say, I want to insert a new artist, I'll tell you what. Someone give me the name of a rock and roll band that you guys like. Bruce, give me a name of a rock and roll band. Ted Nugent. Okay, we're guy from Michigan, so he would pick that. Okay, so we're going to insert Ted Nugent into the table. Now, this is on our local database. And we're going to come back to our agent, back to our group, I mean. And in here, we can force a sync. So down below, we can say sync. So I'm going to force a sync to happen. You'll see down below it says processing. It's just indicating that something went on. I'm going to come over here to logs. And you'll see that at 10:40, a sync happened, was completed successfully. And if you want to, you can copy that and you can bring that up in a text editor, and you'll see that nothing was applied. So let's see if that data actually moved over. So let's go up and take a look at our Chinook database that lives up in the cloud. And I'm going to say I've just got a simple select star from the database, and we'll go down, and Ted Nugent does show up at the bottom. So, sir, can you confirm that Ted Nugent shows up? Okay, good. So Ted Nugent is. So let's go from the other side. And, well, you know what? We probably don't need to. Anyone, you guys want to go from the other side and show it syncing from the other side? So we can do that too. So I need another music artist or band. Anyone have, as it comes up, anyone have a favorite artist that they want me to insert into here? U2, awesome band. Okay, so we say execute. We'll come back out, not to here. We'll come back out to our portal. We'll say sync. You'll see that we have a synchronization successful. As you're doing this stuff, it keeps around the past things that occurred that you're working with. So you can actually come in here and just say dismiss completed, and it will get rid of those previously completed. So it looks like it happened. So let's go back to our table. Now let's go back to our local and go out to artists. And we're going to say select. And we're going to execute here. And we're going to go down to the bottom. And again, sir, can you verify that U2 is at the last? Okay, he did verify U2. So that's how simple it is to do data sync through the portal. So it's not very complex. It's not very hard. All you have to remember is you have a hub and you have your local database, your reference database, and that's it. So let's go back to the slide deck. So this is just a little workflow of what happened when we did this data sync. So hypothetically, we could have a Chinook admin application that people are adding new artists and albums and tracks into our database. And what that does is that data goes into our Chinook database that's on-premise. And when the synchronization gets fired off, the data sync agent will work with the SQL data sync server that's up in Azure, and it will send that data to the SQL database in Azure, and potentially we could get that data out through maybe a Chinook Music Store website. So this is a great scenario that we could show for using data sync. So best practices, I always like to talk about some of the gotchas, some things that you have to remember about the technology that we used. So with these agents, and this is the local, on the local side on your server, always use least privileged accounts with network service access. Ideally, Microsoft recommends that the agents be installed and run on a separate machine from your SQL server. And then do not register your on-premise databases with more than one agent, because if it happens that two syncs happen at the same time, you could kind of get into a hairy situation. So only register each database with one agent. So best practices for a database would be, if you don't have to, don't sync up all of your tables in your database. You don't have to sync up everything. Sit down and develop a plan of what data you really need up in the cloud, because it does take time. It does depend on the traffic that you have at your enterprise or your business or wherever you're doing this. It could depend on how far away you set up your the data center that you install all this on in Azure. So if you're syncing up with data and you want this database in Asia because you have a team of people that need to get to this data, and it's the latency on it coming from Asia back to the United States is long, you could have this database in Asia and sync up, and it just would take a while for that synchronization to happen. All tables in the sync group, any table that you are going to sync up needs a primary key, because it needs to track that the changes based on something, so you need to have a primary key. And I always say test before production. So test out your sync rules, test out different scenarios, see if you can get errors. I always like to test as much as I can, so it's always Better to be safe than sorry. You know what? The biggest error that I've seen is if you go in and you have to change something. So in here, to make a change, you have to refresh your schema. And if you were to say you added a new column or a new table to each side, and you want that column of a table or that new table to be synced up, you have to resync and refresh that schema. Just be careful. Sometimes it does cause issues if you don't understand what you're refreshing in the schema. You'll get errors, things maybe that you accidentally deleted, so there'll be an error that says it can't find a certain resource, and your sync will just keep erroring out because it's expecting a table or a column or a type. So if you have a conflict between types, between your two databases, that will cause errors. Sometimes it will just time out. So sometimes it will just time out between your on-premise and Azure because of any number of reasons, and that'll cause an error. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, can you do this to sync up multiple on-premise databases? You can, but there has to be that hub, that Azure, SQL Azure database as a hub in the center. So you can't sync up, you can't use this to say, I want to sync these two databases that are on-premise and then use an agent to go in between. So there has to be that hub in the center, and you would just set up two agents and two data sync groups. That one would go from your US on-premise database up to Azure, and then another one would go from your Asia database up to Azure. Yeah, yep. You just have to set up independent two sets of groups and agents. Yeah. Well, you would have, it depends on the error. So if it times out, most of the time if it times out, I found that it didn't cause any schema issues or data because that transaction didn't occur, so it did roll back. So more than likely, it won't cause issues on the next sync. So you could wait. You could just wait for the next sync to happen, or you could come in and do a sync on your own. You won't get notified though. That's a feature. So before anyone asks, if there is an error, there is no way to get notified. It won't email you. It won't notify you in any way. So it's a thing that we're asking the data sync team for, some kind of notification. So the next part is, I'm going to drop down into Visual Studio and do C#. If you are not a developer, you will not hurt my feelings if you leave. The next part will be some code. It won't be very complex code. It's only about 50, 60 lines of code. But who are developers in here? Okay, good deal. Okay. So let me show you how to do this with .NET code. So in the resources in the slide deck, there will be a link for go. Exactly. So if you do it in code, and we'll talk about that, the exceptions that you receive. So at the end of this slide deck, if you download it tomorrow or whenever it comes out, there's a link in there for the Microsoft Sync Framework installer. I would recommend you always install the 32-bit installer. I mean, we all probably have 64-bit OSs. The 64-bit installer does not work for me. So I'm just going to let you know that always install the x86. So you install that. It's very simple. This is just a simple console app that basically runs, and it has two arguments. I have an argument that says setup, and I have an argument that says sync. So you have to set up and provision this synchronization before you can go beyond and do an actual sync. Just like when we went through the portal, we had to provision everything and get everything set up. So in here, I have two connection strings. I have a connection string to my server, and I have a connection string to my local database, and also a scope name. And we'll talk about that. Basically, that's my sync group name. And basically, my main, I'm just going to be looking for either setup or sync. And if it's setup, what I'm doing is I am creating my scope based on my scope name. You can see my scope. And I am, today, through this demo, I am going to sync up the artist table and the album table. So at this point, you can sync up just the tables that you want. So I'm going to add those DB sync table descriptions to my scope. And in here, I'm going to check to see, I'm going to set up a SQL Server provision based on my scope and the SQL Server connection for my local database. And I'm going to see if that scope exists. So I'm going to make sure that if that scope does exist, I'm just going to fall out and say that my SQL Server database has already been provisioned for sync. If it hasn't, then I'm going to do a provision for that. So basically, I'm going to come down and create a SQL Sync scope provisioning class or object based on each one of my each side. So I'm going to set up the sync on my SQL Server side, and then I'm going to set up the sync for my SQL Azure side. Basically, it's the same code, but just with a different SQL connection. And that is all I really need. And then at the end, I'm going to close my SQL connections. So this will set up those two tables, the artists and the albums, to have this type of synchronization going on. And don't worry, this code will be downloadable from Channel 9. So when I do a sync, so up here, if I say do a sync test dash sync, it will call my synchronization. Basically, again, I will have my SQL connections, and then I'm going to set up this sync orchestra. And so basically, I'm going to set up an orchestration that will tell the synchronization how I want this synchronization to happen. So in here, I can say, basically, I can say that this is the sync direction order can be a download, it can be download and upload, it can be upload or upload and download. So in this, you can have specialized syncs too. So I could come in and create a web service or an application that says, I want all of my data from my on-premise database to go up to the hub, up to the cloud, but I don't want anything from the hub to come back down or any which way. You can tell it in what order that you want. So I can say I want things uploaded, then downloaded, or I want things downloaded, then uploaded. So if you really want to get very specialized, this is the way to go to do your synchronization. In here, you would just, after you set up your orchestra, you would just say synchronize. I wrapped it in a show statistics because I just show some statistics at the end that say if there were any errors, how long it took, how many changes upload and how many changes download there were. But basically that's it. And at the end, I just close the two SQL connections. So let's run this. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say setup, just as to add a command line argument through Visual Studio. I'll run this. So basically it's saying provision. Ooh. Okay. It's interesting. Let me just catch. 20 minutes ago this worked. Okay. So, okay. It says it's already been set up. Let us see if we sync this. I knew the demo gods would get me at some point. And it errored out. So, I'm not going to dig in and figure out what went wrong. Something happened on the provisioning. So that's an interesting point. I set that up. If you, let's take a look about that because that's a good point to have. So if I come in here and I have Northwind set up in here, there are firewall rules that you have to set up to allow access from your local IPs or from the servers, your servers' IPs that are on premise. So yes. So who you saw? Okay, thank you for seeing that. It was a little quick for me, but yeah, you have to come in, and what you'll do is once you're in a database, you'll see that you'll set up Windows Azure firewall rules for this IP address. If you select that, it will come up and say the current IP address is not included in the existing firewall rules. So basically, somehow my IP address was, refreshed in here since I did that. So now that firewall rule is set up, and if I were to come back in here, it would probably give me, let's try this again after I and see if, okay. So provisioning, so basically on my SQL Server side, that was already provisioned, and now it's provisioning SQL Azure for sync, and that was done. So I can stop that, and let us add one more artist. Sorry, I'm going to have you guys give me one last artist before I let you go. Oh, I can't do that. Sorry. It's not acceptable. It has to be rock and roll. Pink. You know what? I'll do pink because, so we have pink. She's a very angry woman, and I don't want her to come to TechEd and beat me up, so I will put pink into the database. So let's come in here and change my argument to sync and run this and cross my fingers that everything works.
So is the sync agent on the local machine, is that actually trigger-based when you provision? Are you setting up triggers on your tables?
Yeah, we can take a look at what we're doing in the back. Basically, we're not setting up triggers on our tables. We're provisioning and setting up some tables to track the changes, and the application or the sync will do the work on each table that it is configured based on the sync rules. So there aren't any triggers set up, no.
Well, if there's no triggers, then why did it actually insert into 3 tables that you want to insert? I'm curious.
It didn't insert it into 3 tables. When I did that insert, it said use Chinook, so that's one statement. So it was 3 statements that it did. So it just inserted into one table. So this takes a few minutes, depending on how many people are running BitTorrents or watching videos from the last 2 days. But in the end, what you'll get is that statistics that will show how many changes and if we had errors and stuff. So let me run that. I'm going to go back to the slide deck. So I'm going to talk about this gentleman over here asked what happens when things go wrong. Now on the .NET side, if there's a conflict between the on-premise database and the SQL Azure database, you will get a apply change failed event will get fired. So basically, that event will get raised, and the details about the conflict will be in the argument object, the args object for that event. So you'll be able to catch that event and then work based on it. So that's kind of one thing that the portal version of DataSync does not have that this code-based does have. So what's the difference between SQL Azure DataSync and our custom DataSync with SQL Azure? There really isn't a lot that's different. Basically, on the custom DataSync, we just have more control over what we can do. It's using the same technology, so I always say that the Azure DataSync meets about 85% of my needs, and if I reach a certain scenario that it needs, say it needs to be fired, synchronization for one table needs to be fired off every 15 seconds, you know what? I can drop down into a custom DataSync, and I can build that as a web service, and we can get that working in a matter of a couple days through testing and verification. So there isn't a lot of difference. The difference is just, 1, you're going through a web portal, and 2, you're actually building code. I'm going to cut back before we get into scenarios and see, okay, so in here this worked. It says that the start time and the end time, upload changes applied, 624. So basically, this was going through and doing a whole nother sync between the two sides. So on one side, it was looking at 624 records, and on the other side, it was looking at 625. So we could see that there was a difference between the two sides, and there were no fails on either side. So if I take a look and go back to my SQL Azure database or my Windows Azure SQL database, and I take a look at the artist again. And it takes a second to bring this up. See if I just run this again from here. Oh, I added another one. So let's go. Okay, so we can run this, execute this. Basically, Pink is down at the bottom along with a second U2. So we must really like U2 in this database. So basically that's how we work with on a code level. Let me go back and run through this. The last thing I want to talk about are scenarios. There's lots of different scenarios that you could do. The first one is what we demoed today. Is I have an on-premise database. I want to sync it up to a database up on Windows Azure, and that's what I want. I just want it to be backed up. So if, heaven forbid, I lose data locally on-premise, I can just set that back up to sync back up from the hub, which is up in the cloud, and back down on-premise. So great scenario around this is another safe way, fail-proof data backup plan for organizations. I find that this plan, this kind of just backing up your database, is a great way to get customers and clients to use SQL Azure for the first time, to get them comfortable with using the cloud. Next scenario could be a mobile data syncing. So this is kind of what the gentleman, he's left now, but this is the scenario he came up with. If I had database or data in a database in my world headquarters, and I need to sync that out to other databases, maybe in other countries, I could use this, or else other databases that are on local smaller devices like laptops and tablets and smartphones. I could use this scenario also for this. You would have to, from the mobile side, you would have to code that syncing, because that sync agent can't work with those type of devices because of that local sync agent.
Are the SDKs available for iOS?
No. So this is primarily Microsoft Sync Framework is just for the Microsoft stack. And the last one is, if you want to, you can sync up an Azure database to another Azure database. So you could set up, maybe if you pushed all your databases up in the cloud, you could have a master database that held all of your data, and another database that held the data that just customers would see. That way you could be safe from if something happened, or if the application that you developed against the customer database somehow let people in, it got hacked. It could be a good way not to let them see your sensitive private data. So you could get these two synced up and only show certain, or have certain data in each one. Any questions? I'll try to answer anything if anyone has any questions left We have about 14 minutes. Go ahead. Well, what it's really saying is that's how many records it went through between those two tables. It just verified, and yeah, really what it does is when you do a sync, it will take a look, and that's why there has to be primary keys on all the tables. It takes a look at all the primary keys from one side and from the other side and finds the differences, and then synchronizes based on the direction that you set up through that orchestration. That's a great question. So I'll do it so people can hear it online. So what if you had a primary key that matched on both sides? One is I would build my databases not to have that type of primary key. That's why if I'm going to build databases that are going to be synced, I usually use a GUID for the primary key, or I provision a segment of my, if it's an integer, a big int, and I do an identity, I give each database a certain range, but primarily I would just use a GUID, and I wouldn't have that problem to begin with. If you do run into that problem, the sync isn't going to know, because it finds when it goes through, it's going to find that there's primary keys on both sides that match, and it's going to assume that that data. Yeah, it depends on your direction, but if they match and the number of records match on both sides, you're not going to get a sync at all. So there was, yeah, back here. The sync, data sync through the portal does not at this point. So you would have to drop down and use use code, and basically use the Microsoft Sync framework. No, it doesn't work with the portal. Doesn't work with SQL CE or any non-SQL Server database at this point.
What would drive you to use this technology as opposed to some of the other, always on availability, mechanisms to sync your data? What are the determining factors?
Yeah, I mean, it all depends. It would depend on. I don't know any competing technologies. I just know this is for the code side, the custom data sync. You don't have to pay for any service. It's completely customized, so you can control the design of it. From the Azure side, I'm not going to go into a lot of the pricing here, because it changes, and I don't try to talk about Azure pricing very much in these talks. But from the Azure data sync, it's really affordable to sync up your databases into Azure. So, I mean, that's from my point. I use it as an affordable way to back up my database.
Where I was going is, if you have an on-prem database, you could use like mirrors or something like that. So it's more a technology question.
Sure. You could use mirroring, but that mirroring, I don't know if you could really mirror up into Azure per se. So, yeah, there's a lot of features in SQL Server that haven't been brought into Windows Azure SQL Database yet. So that's, I wouldn't say that that's a feature that's out there. So it's a little more, think of it as up in the cloud, SQL Azure gives you a lot of the capabilities from a logical standpoint of your database. A lot of the physical side of the database, they're not going to bring in because you're not actually going to get to into the server of the underlying server of that database exists on. So. Yeah, that's not in Azure yet. So the question was the replication that is in the full version of SQL Server 2008 and 2012. No, those features are not up in Azure SQL databases at this point. So the load that it puts on the initial sync depends on the sync rules that you set up. So if you do every table and there's 100 tables in your database, yeah, it's going to put a load on there. It's going to walk through each table that's set up through the sync rules or through the code that you set up. And I mean, it won't lock those down a huge amount for a long period of time, but it could be up to minutes for the initial.
Does it do it like replication where it creates a snapshot and pushes it out, or does it just go through and do table by table?
It does table by table, and it uses intermediary tables that are set up on each side to hold those records, and then it will sync based on those tables that are created for the changes. So it won't put a huge amount on your primary tables. So. Yeah. I mean,
But at some point, I'm going to have to do it from the production server, so I was just curious.
yeah, I mean, I can show you what it looks like after you set all these provisioning up on the table. So here's all of these data sync tables. Yeah, it actually has a table for each table that you're tracking in your sync rules.
So when you build, okay, so say you're doing this for the first time, so you have your on-premise database, and it's production, and it's all ready to go, and you build a database in Azure.
Yep.
Is that data, like with replication, you have to use like SQL Compare or something, and make both databases the same as far as schema and everything before you can snapshot? With this, do you have to do that, or is the other database just an empty database and you can just push it?
Yeah, the other database, you could do that. So I could have basically, so the question is, do you have to have the start two equal databases? And no, you don't have to. So I could have a full database that's on-premise, and I could have a database that's empty, but with the same schema, or with the same schema that I've set up through the sync rules. So if I had a database up in the cloud that held a segment of my tables that was based on my on-premise, the sync rules I set up between the tables I want to sync, yes, they have to match up from a schema standpoint, but the entire database does not have to. So it won't replicate schema. So if I add a record in here, it won't go up and add the record, then bring the new data in. I have to keep schemas matched on both sides.
So what happens like with an upgrade? Like
You have to add a table to both.
Automatically sync then? Or
So, yeah, at that point, you match up the schemas on both sides. Then you go back through the portal, and I'll show you. We have a couple minutes left. You go through the portal. And you will come down and you'll say sync rules. And this will go out. Basically, down below, you'll see that there's a refresh. That's where you'll refresh that schema. And we'll give you the ability to say, do you want to refresh the schema based on the hub or based on the reference database? And you'll say one or the other, and it will update the schema that it's tracking through the portal. And then you can add and adjust your sync rules based on that change in the schema. But it's not automatic.
does the refresh in the sync, let's look specifically at that column, will it drop columns if you do a refresh from one source that's missing a column on whatever your destination is?
Depends on what you base your schema on. Yeah, I mean, if I delete a column on my on-premise and I refresh the schema based on that, it will change the schema that it's tracking to be without that column in what you see here in the portal. So you have to be careful. You have to plan this out, and you have to make sure you're not going to cause any issues going forward if you make changes and you want to update those sync rules based on changes to your database. So have a couple minutes. Let me come back into my slide deck. So this project, if anyone's on GitHub, this project is out on GitHub for anyone to use. So there's a link for this project on GitHub. It will also, I'll give it to the people that run TechEd, and hopefully we can get it up as a downloadable resource from Channel 9 when this video gets pushed up. So the track resources, here's some stuff. You can download this slide deck later on. Just some links out to data sync, SQL data sync on MSDN, Windows Azure SQL database on MSDN, some of the Windows Azure developer guidance. So I like to make people aware that there is a developer guidance around Windows Azure. And then the last two ones are for the sync framework, the Microsoft Sync framework. The first one is just the web page for it out on MSDN. It has a lot of tutorials and samples. And the last one is the link to download the SDK for the Sync framework. And like I said, I recommend that you install the 32-bit version of that. So. Sure. Sorry. Yeah, if you just go out to my GitHub, if you just go github.com, C Woodruff, you'll see that repository. It'll list out all my repositories that I've created out on GitHub. You'll see it. It's the only TechEd one out there. So, and if you do want to contact me, there's some of my contact information. My email, that's my work email for Telerik. My personal one is just cwoodruff@live.com. My Twitter, my Skype, and then my blog. So I have I need to blog more, but you'll find some interesting stuff on my blog. And you can download this from the slide deck after it's up. So please fill out the evaluation. Let me know what you liked about this talk, what you didn't, and I appreciate you guys coming and sitting through my session. Thank you.